Monmouth's victory at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge and the accompanying glory was almost instantly tinged with conspiracy and betrayal. For surely, marching back south from Scotland, his head must have swirled with memories of his father telling him the tale of his own march south, which would end in the ignominious defeat at Worcester. He would be aware of the talk he had heard and joined in with at the King's Head Tavern, the headquarters of the Green Ribbon Club. Talk of the lowlands of Scotland being a perfect recruiting ground for an armed revolt against the king and the government. How many of Monmouth's hot-headed entourage would have suggested to the king's son that if he had played his cards right, he could be marching south at the head of his own Scottish army, an army which would be happy to remove the Duke of York from the line of succession and by force of arms make Monmouth the legitimate heir to the throne. But Monmouth had no intention of leading an armed insurrection. Not yet, anyway. The Duke's mind must have been a whirl of emotions, and the news from London must have been exciting as well as feared. News of how the Exclusion Bill was progressing, how the king would receive his son back, especially after he had defied his father's orders in not falling on the Scots with a shock and awe campaign. What lies would Lauderdale's spies have been peddling? What was the Duke of York doing at this time? And uppermost in Monmouth's mind, how was he to disband the hastily formed regiments which had helped him crush the rebellious Covenanters? His fears about Lauderdale were soon to be recognised when Monmouth accepted to stay the night at Sir John Reresby's in Doncaster. Sir Thomas Armstrong, one of Monmouth's faithful retainers, told the Duke he had heard news that the king had heard some falsehoods concerning the Duke and had in all haste sent for him in Scotland. Monmouth did not hesitate and took advantage of Reresby's personal coach and 6 horses. Down the rutted and meandering Great North Road his coach clattered. As soon as he reached the cobbles of Edgware, Monmouth received a welcome of a returning hero. Bonfires, fireworks, and vast crowds all chanting, "A Monmouth! A Monmouth! Long live the Protestant Duke! God bless your Highness, and the devil take the Pope!" The voice of the public was sweet music, but how would he be received by Parliament, the court, and most importantly, his father? His father, King Charles II, was embattled as ever. The Whigs, led by the cobra-like Shaftesbury, were pushing hard for the Exclusion Bill to be passed, to forever expel the king's brother, the Catholic Duke of York, from the succession. Charles had a plan to counter this, but there was a price. He would dissolve Parliament again, and once more take payment from his foreign financier, Louis XIV of France. Yet Monmouth should not have feared his meeting with the king, for as ever, Charles was immensely proud of his eldest son. He heaped praise on Monmouth, and yet the poison dripped into his ear by York and Lauderdale still managed to seep out. Charles said of the aftermath of the Battle of Bothwell Bridge, "There would have been no prisoners if I'd been there." Monmouth recoiled at his father's words. "I could not kill men in cold blood," said Monmouth. "That is work only for butchers." But these words could not chill the bond which lived so strong between these two men, and soon the two were seen playing tennis together. Whilst in London, Monmouth kept himself busy by disbanding the hastily formed regiments, whilst Charles took to ship to view the country's coastal defences from Woolwich to Portsmouth. But near the end of August, disaster struck. The king fell ill. It was a moment of sheer panic, and almost overnight, the shadow of civil war reared its ugly head once more. Monmouth wrote to the Lord Mayor, "It is the opinion of the king's physicians that his distemper will turn into a tertian ague, but I do not doubt he will take effectual care for quietening men's minds." The king's condition worsened by the day. The medicine and treatments he received would have been questionable as well as frightening, and yet he was still cogent enough to comply with his son's wish that whilst he was still ill, he would forbid in express terms that the Duke of York was forbidden to return to England. For his now hated uncle to remain in exile would have been welcome to Monmouth, but surely it was Shaftesbury who was putting steel into him at this time. England waited with bated breath and fearful apprehension. News sheets were read almost before they had been printed. Coffee houses and taverns were abuzz with hushed whispers and talk of conspiracy. Henry Saville in Paris wrote, "What if the king died? Dear God, what a change would such an accident make? The very thought of it frightens me out of my wits." Shaftesbury, Monmouth's mentor and leader of the Green Ribbon Club, was perfectly content with the possible death of the king. He knew who would be, and who should be, the next in line to the throne. He was ready for Monmouth to become king, or a protector of a republic. Monmouth was the man of the moment. He had the political support of the Whigs and the Lord President of the Council. He was the most powerful and praised military commander of the land. He was Lord Lieutenant of the East Riding in Staffordshire and the Governor of Hull. He was a huge landowner in Scotland, Chancellor of Cambridge University, and in charge of the current King's security. And of course, as seen in our last video, he had just won the hearts and minds of the Scottish Lowlands for his caring treatment of the rebellious Covenanters after their defeat at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge. Surely they would follow Monmouth and assist him on his journey to the throne. But despite all this support and love for Monmouth, there was another group who would play a large part and vital role in this drama. A powerful, middle-of-the-road party which supported neither Monmouth nor York. Their biggest fear, like many of the general population, was the return of civil war. A civil war, the horror of which was still within living memory for so many. These men, for they were all men, would have preferred Mary, the Duke of York's daughter, to act as regent instead of her father, and in the meantime they were content to get York back to England to oversee this. Clearly, like the king, these powerful men believed in the rightful succession of the crown and that it must be followed, despite the fact that the heir apparent was a Catholic. The three main men, called the Triumvirate, consisted of Essex, a member of the Green Ribbon Club, Halifax, the Great Trimmer, and Sunderland, as well as Feversham, who was not only captain of the Duke of York's troop of lifeguards, but also shared the duties of gold stick-in-waiting with Monmouth. And these two roles allowed Feversham to send a secret message to the Duke of York in Scotland to come home at his brother's request. York needed little encouragement and found his way back to London by the start of September. Monmouth discovered the return of his uncle whilst out hunting, and he could not hide his frustration. When he came face to face with York, the Duke commented on his nephew's countenance. There was a sort of disorder and disturbed carriage about him. But there were many others seriously worried about the Duke's sudden return. Many feared the outbreak of anti-Catholic riots that would see mass looting and vandalism. Sir William Temple recorded his reaction. "I went to Windsor, and the first man I met was Lord Halifax, coming down from court on foot, and with a face of trouble. As soon as he saw me, with hands lifted up 2 or 3 times, upon which I stopped and alighting asked what was the matter. He told me, I knew as well as he, that the Duke of York was come, and everybody was amazed. But where we were, or what we would be next, nobody knew." But the political temperature, fortunately for York, had cooled over the last few days. The Popish plot and the despicable lies of Titus Oates had been quiet for a few days, and only recently Wakeman, the Queen's physician, had been acquitted of conspiring to kill the king. Oates, for the time being, drifted into insignificance for a short while, and as did the terrors of the Popish plot. It is ironic that the king did recover from his illness, and the medication that achieved this was quinine, at the time called Jesuit powder. In fact, the king was so better that a week after York's return to London, the king was eating mutton and partridges. York wrote to his nephew and son-in-law, William Prince of Orange, "His Majesty is, God be praised, very well, and has quite recovered his strength." But it was now the time for tough decisions. The king had recovered, and so there was no real reason for York to stay in London. He should really retire back into exile, back to Scotland. And yet, the Duke defied this. He stood by the fact that he deemed his exile to be unfair, unlawful, and that he would not be sent away again unless the impertinent Monmouth was exiled too, and deprived of his Lord Generalship. The king was torn. What should he do? Back his brother and the lawful succession and risk civil war by banishing his beloved son? Or send his brother back to Scotland and keep Monmouth in London and have the Whigs sweep Parliament and have the Exclusion Bill passed, forever denying his brother the crown, which he firmly believed was his by right? With York being obstinate and stirring up mischief, Sunderland waded in on York's side. Your Majesty must demonstrate to the country party, the Whigs led by Shaftesbury, your determination to defend the legal succession. Charles was trapped and had to make a decision. The royal blow fell, and fell swiftly. On the 13th of September, it was reported, the Duke of Monmouth is turned out of all command and banished the three kingdoms. The news yesterday morning, like gunpowder set on fire, did in an instant run over the whole city to the general amazement of all people. York was not a humble victor and wrote a pompous letter once more to his nephew. Though it may make the Duke of Monmouth most popular amongst ill men and seditious people, it will quite dash his foolish hopes that he so vainly pursued. This his Majesty resolved in, upon it being represented to him that he was not reasonable to leave the Duke of Monmouth here and send me back again into Flanders. As for the generalship, nobody will have it more. York was now showing his true feelings towards his nephew, and wrote a cynical note to his aide, one Colonel Legge. There is one thing that troubles me, and puts odd thoughts in my head. It is that all the while his Majesty has never said a word, nor gone about to make a good understanding between me and the Duke of Monmouth. For though it is a thing I shall never seek, yet methinks it is what his Majesty might please. The king was not content with sending both his brother and son back into exile. He struck at others as well. Shaftesbury was in the king's sights, and was soon deprived of his title as Lord President of the Privy Council. On top of this, the king attacked one of Monmouth's closest friends, Tom Armstrong. Armstrong had treated Monmouth like a son for many years, had counselled him, guided him, and fought alongside his charge. The king was not one of Armstrong's supporters, as he disliked the paternal role he had played with Monmouth. Not to mention how vehemently Armstrong had argued in Parliament for the passing of the Exclusion Bill. He had also spent time with Charles during his exile in Holland, had known Lucy Walters, Monmouth's mother, and could, if he so desired, start some ugly rumours. We can only imagine how disappointed and shocked Monmouth must have been at the rapid change of circumstances. He had only just returned from a triumphant campaign in the north, had been showered with praise and welcomes as he returned. The Exclusion Bill was still being argued heartily in the Commons. Things were looking up, but what must have felt like hours, he had lost everything, and to make matters worse, it was all due to his despised uncle, the Catholic Duke. Thoughts of vengeance must have been forefront in Monmouth's mind. Arguing was useless, and he was given a fortnight to sort out his affairs, hand over all his commands with his usual thoroughness, and ensured his assistants carried on their work in all his other offices. It all happened so quickly, from penning his last notes in the cockpit overlooking Horse Guards parade, to boarding the royal barge at Whitehall. He was off to Holland, the country of his birth, his childhood, and the land where he last saw his mother. So within 2 weeks, the Duke of Monmouth, the most famous soldier and courtier in the country, had fallen from the heights of his achievements. Protestant England was shocked and angered. He had been promised by his supporters in the Green Ribbon Club that his exile would be a short-lived affair, and he would soon be welcomed back as England's hero. Popular ballads were already being written. Is Monmouth banished? Must he not stay here? Can he eclipse, so quickly disappear? Methinks we sink in our disjointed state, Rowleys headlong down the precipice of fate. Sure poisonous envy did their breasts invade. Who did your Majesty to this persuade? You were abused when you banished thus him, the delight of yourself and us. To see our last video on Monmouth's incredible victory against the rebellious Covenanter Scots at Bothwell Bridge, click here. As always, thanks for watching.